Okay. All right. So here we are now going to start doing a bit of a talk on Buddhism, and just a few little introductory words about Buddhism. Every religion is a bit different, you know. I like to think of them as having different flavors. They focus on different aspects of reality, different aspects of the human experience. Okay, this is what brings a lot of diversity to the different religions. They're not just all one and the same and equal. There's a lot of diversity there. And one thing that characterizes Buddhism is it's very philosophical as religion. And it is a religion that is not God-centered, God-focused, as so many religions are. Okay, it is not about worshiping a God, obeying God, you know, being devoted to a particular deity. It's not focused around that, even though those elements will show up in its own kind of Buddhicized version, right? Instead, it's very philosophical in that it basically, what the Buddha does is he deconstructs reality. And not only does he deconstruct the nature of reality out there, he also deconstructs the self and really raises some deep questions as to what is the nature of the self, what is the nature of reality. And so enlightenment here is not about becoming one with the supreme being, okay, as it is in a lot of traditions. Instead, it's just coming into the truth of what is, and having that experience being liberating. Okay, liberating your sense of identity from your false self, as he's deconstructed the self. And so this is where it'll be a little bit in common with a lot of traditions, where a lot of religious traditions have that emphasis of shifting your sense of identity, shifting your sense of identity away from what we often could call your lower self, this physical incarnated form that we tend to identify with, right? Shifting away from that to a sense of divine self is what's common. But here, Siddhartha does not replace the lower self with a higher self. It's just basically undoes the lower self, deconstructs it. Right? But yet it can have a very similar experiential effect of bringing a sense of liberation, right, from the limitations and the, you know, unfortunately, a lot of negative dynamics that are operative here in this physical incarnated self that's caught up in the dramas of everyday life. Is like, you undo your sense of self there, and you undo all of that drama, the drama of wanting this. I don't get that. I hate this, and I want this. You know, the whole drama that goes on here, man. It's everywhere, right? It's like, you're free from that. You're set free from that. Liberation. And you come into a place of peace and bliss. Right? And anyway, this is sort of how it all begins here. Okay. So Buddhism is difficult in terms of just philosophically, in terms of it's very philosophical in nature. Number one. Number two, the second point I want to make out here is there's a lot of diversity within Buddhism, as there is in virtually every religion. But as Buddhism will develop here, there'll be, again, as is common, we've seen this in Hinduism, there will be new scriptures, new holy books that will come into play with new teachings and new ideas. And that's going to kick off new movements and new trends, i.e. new sects, okay, new particular groups as to how they choose to interpret Buddhism and what they add to it and how they tweak it. So that in the end, you've got quite a variety, all kinds of different Buddhisms, not one, you know, Buddhism. And the Buddhisms can be so different from one another. They're basically different religions. Okay, so you'll have the early Buddhism that is sometimes called Hinayana Buddhism. That is the closest to what Siddhartha, the Buddha, actually taught. Okay, and the sect that's closest to that, that represents that, is the Theravada school of Buddhism. Okay, the Theravada sect, if you like, which is dominant in South Asia, like in Sri Lanka, Thailand, etc. Okay, that's what's dominant there. Then a newer vision of Buddhism develops. It's called Mahayana Buddhism, which we'll be talking about, and it'll kick off all kinds of groups and sects, and they can be as different as Zen Buddhism compared to Pure Land Buddhism, and we're going to look at both of those. Okay. And that's what then kicks off over in, if you want to call it North Asia, but in China and Japan, for example. Then there's a third type of Buddhism that kicks off as Buddhism goes into Tibet. And this is Tibetan Buddhism. And Tibetan Buddhism is, again, very distinct and unique. And you'll have different schools and sects within Tibetan Buddhism, okay? And there are 4 main schools, of which the Dalai Lama is the head of one of those 4 schools that happen to come into power in the history of Tibet, political power, right? And therefore, you know, he's been kind of the king and priest, if you like, of Tibet in a sense. But anyway, so Tibetan Buddhism is also very distinct because Buddhism then blended with more indigenous traditions in Tibet, Tibetan shamanism type of thing. And it kind of went its own way, being heavily tantric in orientation. Okay, tantric in orientation. I'm just going to excuse me, I just had to sneeze. So you have Tibetan Buddhism over there, right? And that sometimes is referred to as a Vajrayana Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism. So that in general, Buddhism will have 3 main traditions: Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, to use that terminology. Yana means a vehicle. Okay, almost like a boat that will carry you across the waters of samsara to bring you over to the land of freedom, which is nirvana. That's sort of the idea. And I'll put those into a slide for you, just so you know, so you know how to spell them and whatnot. Normally I have a handout in class for this. So those become the 3 main vehicles. And you could think of them almost equivalent to what you'd have in Christianity, where you'll have Christianity developing, and then from that foundational kind of early period, you'll have the main branch of Roman Catholicism, and then Eastern Orthodox tradition, and then Protestantism, right? And this is a kind of, you know, fairly common thing, is that you'll have different movements, groups in a religion that become major traditions within that religion. And then, of course, within those traditions, there'll be subgroupings and sects and various groups that break out. So you have all kinds, thousands of Protestant denominations that can be quite different from each other, right? The same thing will happen in terms of, say, for example, Mahayana Buddhism. In Mahayana Buddhism, there's over 100 different little sects and groups that evolve and develop over time. Many of them become extinct, right? Others continue to still be thriving, right? So every religion is very complex. There are many groups and traditions within a religion, and that's why it's sometimes very difficult to come up with a nice little one summary sentence as to Buddhism is this or Christianity is that. There's a lot of diversity here. And so whose viewpoint are you choosing to represent the essential truth of what this religion is? That becomes a complicated issue, okay? So just keep that in mind. In class, I usually draw a tree, the tree of a religion. Every religion could be almost seen as a tree. The roots are the various sources it draws from. Then you have the main trunk of the tree, which is sort of the foundational pillars of that religion, usually based on a founder, a figure like a Jesus or a Buddha, all right, and their teachings and ideas and different elements of their life and what they all did, that so often becomes the pillar, the foundational trunk, the main trunk of that tree of religion. And then big branches will come out, and some of the really big, heavy branches will become like Hinayana Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, right, or Roman Catholicism and Protestantism here. And then the little branches coming out of it could be different sects that emerge, like Zen Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism, Anglicanism, Methodist churches, what have you. Okay. And then little twiggies, those really little small little twiggies coming out of a particular branch from a major trunk. That then represents that particular temple or church in a particular country, in a particular time period, even in a particular city. Okay, say a Pure Land temple in Japan in the year 1200 versus a Pure Land temple in China of around 500, okay, CE, for example. And then the leaves are the individuals of that particular city, of that particular time period, that are members of that particular temple or church. And that individual's vision of what they think their religion is all about, what they all believe and think, and how they understand it, right? They're the leaves. And those leaves that make up the tree are all the individuals that are participating in this religious tradition that is huge and diverse. It will kind of express itself differently in different contexts, in different time periods, in different countries. Right? So it really gets to be a pretty complicated picture. And again, this, I should make this all, I think I will make this just a little separate video here, because this is making a very important point that people need to understand about everything. It doesn't just apply to religion. The huge problem for the human race is the complexity of life, the complexity of reality, the complexity of the human experience over, tens of thousands of years, all right, as we've been on this planet, for example. And all of the history, all that people have thought and what all has happened. It is so huge. And then there's so much about reality we hardly even understand. We're just scraping the surface, dear people. And yet we are so bloomin' arrogant to think that we can come up with, within a few sentences, the truth about it all. Right? And we so absolutize our very infinitesimally small little understanding of something. We so absolutize it as though it's the whole truth. And then we go out to war over it, which is what we're seeing out there today. It's crazy, all right? It's crazy. And so people need to realize and need to be a little bit more humble that we're just always scrapping the surface. You cannot put the truth about it all in any kind of a sentence, because words can never contain that truth. It's way bigger than anything we could ever come up with for a statement, never mind even a book, never mind even a library. All right, the truth is always going to be bigger and greater than what we can communicate, express, verbalize, put into some kind of a package. Okay, there's always more to understand here. And this is a big issue for humanity, is how we're overly simplistic and we always engage in a form of reductionism, reducing the complexity of it all into a few little key formulas, a few key statements that then becomes our ideology that we go to war over, all right? And we get on the streets and start fighting and doing all kinds of things as we're seeing happening right today, going on out there, which is insane. And so we need to wise up and recognize how unbelievably ignorant we are. We need to be a bit more humble about it. And we need to recognize that whatever is presented here, even what I present, is never, ever, nothing is ever the final word on anything. We cannot even bring the final word to anything, all right? So that, just to give you an example, here we're going to talk about Buddhism. Well, do we even know for sure that he actually lived? Well, how on earth can we even know what he actually taught, right? Just so to give you a heads up, his life story, the teachings of the Buddha, aspects of his life weren't written down at all for hundreds of years, okay? The earliest form and seen as the incomplete biography of the Buddha dates to the 1st century of the Common Era, BCE, okay, 1st century BCE, and yet that's like 400 to 500 years later. Okay, and then the more complete one is even a few hundred years after that. Okay, so how dare I even tell you what the Buddha taught? I mean, if we want to be as fanatical as so many people tend to be, in terms of just only really getting at the truth, we would keep our mouths shut, because really, we hardly know the truth about anything in an absolute kind of a way. We're only presenting approximations, which is, we're making different aspects or points. And there's so many aspects and points that could be made on any given issue, it can almost become infinite. Okay, and so everything is piecemeal. Everything that's presented, everything that we learn is only partial. It's never complete. It's never, ever, ever the final word, right? And I just need to say this because this is becoming a very important issue out there today. And even commentary, well, there are other things that you could say about this, and there's other things you could say that, of course there is. Are you kidding me? I'm just here trying to give a bit of an introduction to some of the ideas and maybe some of the issues, some of the concepts. This is all a bit of an introduction. How on earth can you cover anything in detail within, an hour or so? I mean, it's honestly, okay? So remember this. This is something that's very important for people to realize, all right? So again, I just want you to get from this and appreciate every religion is extremely complex, some way more so than others. Some are quite more simple than others. Some are quite new, haven't had as much historical impact nor historical evolution that's taken place. Okay, Buddhism, a lot of historical evolution, is over 2,000 years old, 2,500 years old, and yeah, without a pope dictating, okay, that only this can be believed and not that, you know, in terms of controlling what gets believed. It's like it was pretty open-ended. It would adapt, it would be fluid and go from one country region to another and adapt to it and blend in and integrate aspects of that culture into it, you know, and so then it really evolves. That's what we'll definitely be seeing here. So just keep this in mind, okay, as you study religion. And I think I will just keep this brief here, and I will start Buddhism on a separate recording. Okay, so just remember, this is just an intro to how complex it is, okay? All right.